Good afternoon. This is Christine Binger with a case study over copyright in the computer, regulations governing technology. To look at the case study, what happened and is happening, the PTA at St. Regis raised money to purchase 20 computers for a computer lab style classroom. Along with that, they allocated enough money for 2 years of software programs to be utilized by the students in that computer lab. Mrs. Lynn, the librarian, eventually turned library media specialist, monitored the use of those computers and the software. She was eventually approached by other teachers asking for copies of software so that teachers could use them on their independent computers so students could have independent time. Ms. Lynn was totally excited about this and thought this would be a great opportunity for more students to utilize the resources. So started making copies and gave them to third grade teachers, Miss Brandon and Miss Williams. Miss Williams happily accepted, while Miss Brandon was a little more hesitant about it and decided to talk to Miss Lynn about this issue, citing that this violates copyright laws that are in place to prevent stealing resources. While Mrs. Lynn was not happy about this response, Miss Brandon still felt uncomfortable, so she went to the principal, Mr. Staple, about her concerns and the consequences that could come for the school, the district, Miss Lynn, or even herself, Miss Brandon, for being aware of what is taking place. Mr. Sample approached Miss Lynn about copying the material, and she still seemed very bothered that this was an issue, claiming that she wanted to do what was best for our students and making copies of different resources would provide the most opportunity for learning. Mr. Sample responded by explaining the copyright requirements and laws and what could happen to Miss Lynn. But Mr. Sample now has to decide what to do moving forward. The people that are involved are the St. Regis School as a whole, the PTA specifically for purchasing the materials, Mrs. Lynn for overseeing the materials and making copies, Miss Brandon because she's aware of copyright laws and is uncomfortable by utilizing the resources and knowing that people are utilizing them, and Mr. Sample because he is the principal of the building and should be aware of everything that's taking place and has to deal with the issue at hand. So the legal issue is that Mrs. Lynn is violating copyright laws by making copies of the computer software for teachers throughout the building. It seems that because she has a stack of copies, she's making multiple copies of every software program with the pretense that she's doing it for the right reasons, which may be true. However, in doing so, she is breaking the law, and publishers can get very upset by that. The ethical issue is that Miss Lynn is unconcerned about making the copies and continues to do it even though she's not communicating that with anybody, especially when she originally was communicating all choices with Mr. Sample. Mrs. Williams and other teachers are happily taking the software copies, which is making it an ethical issue as well, because whether or not they know about the copyright laws, even though they should, they are ethically taking the copies and willing to use them, maybe claiming that if they didn't copy it, it's not their responsibility. But it is, since they are taking it and utilizing it. So to synthesize into one sentence, Mrs. Lynn, in an effort to support staff and students, is making copies of software that has been purchased by the PTA. And when confronted about this violation and the potential consequences by Principal Sample, she seems to think she can continue violating copyright laws under the pretense, well, no one will tell. Miss Lynn seems to believe that they are a small community. Only a few people know that these are getting copied. And what's the harm if it's for the good of the students? What we know, the people involved, as stated earlier, Principal Sample, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Brandon, a third grade teacher who's uncomfortable with the copywriting of the resources, Mrs. Williams, who happily accepted, though I'm sure there are other members of the staff who have also happily accepted, the PTA as a whole for purchasing, but then also the PTA president specifically for supporting the copying of the resources with Mrs. Lynn, and the software publisher because it is their resources and you are violating their policies and guidelines in copying the material. The place is St. Regis, a rural community. They have roughly 450 students in K through 8, about 2 teachers per grade, so they are a very small school. And then high school gets bused to the local community, which is about 25 miles away. The program, we are looking at software programs purchased by the PTA. These are programs that go on the computer that are designed to support student learning in various ways, and teachers are wanting copies of them for their classroom so students can have an independent workstation on their computer. But what we don't know is all of the people who have received the computer software. While the case study specified Mrs. Williams and Miss Brandon, though Miss Brandon turned it down, Mrs. Williams accepted. It also implies that there are many teachers accepting this, and Mrs. Lynn has made multiple copies of the software program, implying that she's planning on handing them out to multiple people. So who all currently has it and who's waiting on it, and how involved are they in this process? And what do they know? The place, again, what classrooms or teachers have the software? Even if they aren't using it, who has a copy? Where in the building are these copies stored at? And how can we ensure that we have all of them? And then the program, what we don't know is what is the school's internet or technology acceptable use policy? While the case study doesn't specify it, it is pretty clear that schools should have one that they implement for teachers, staff members, parents, and students that they are required to use that outlines these things. So where's that document? Have they gone over it as a school, considering they're new to technology? And if not, how are they going to go about creating one? To review and prioritize. Could this situation be damaging? 100% yes. They are violating the laws around copyright and what publishers expect of them for purchasing their materials. This means that the people that can be hurt as a result of this, the school district as a whole, including the students, the St. Regis School specifically because they are the ones making the copies, Mrs. Lynn because she physically made the copies, as well as the PTA member who supported her. The PTA and community as a whole will be hurt by this should it come out. Principal Sample, especially since he knows about it, should he choose not to do anything, he is liable. And the St. Regis students are hurting because they are getting materials that are now going to be taken away from them, which is unfortunate, but we can find ways to better serve them. Section 5, review and prioritize, continued. We have all relevant stakeholders been consulted? No, they have not yet. While the PTA president supported Mrs. Lynn in creating these copies, Mrs. Lynn didn't communicate with Mr. Sample, which is interesting because they worked together up until this point. Other teachers have not been consulted because had they been consulted, a teacher like Mrs. Brandon, who's well aware of the copyright laws, would have explained this and urged them not to continue. What I would like to know more to assess this is what is the internet or technology acceptable use policy for the school? Is Mrs. Lynn violating something she knows about, or is she completely unaware of the expectation of the school? And do I have enough information to make this decision? I do, because it is very clear what's expected of schools when they purchase softwares, and copying software is not permissible. So there are 3 action plans. Number 1 is no action. Leave Miss Lynn to continue creating and distributing copies because it's for the best of the students. The moderate one would be to destroy all copies that have been created, create and provide training for technology acceptable use, and communicate with the PTA and find additional resources that can be provided to students. The extreme option would be to fire Miss Lynn off the top because she's violating copyright under the assumption that she knows what it is and how the school is expected to follow it. Hold a meeting to communicate the ramifications of continuing to do this with staff, and to share the technology use policy if they have one, and if they don't have one that they should create. And then notify the publisher of the infringement and hopefully come to an agreement on how to handle this. Should it just be destroying, paying a penalty, or finding a way to purchase more materials at a lower rate? So evaluating these options, should Mr. Sample choose to take no action? The positives are that Miss Lynn gets to keep her job and that the teachers get the software programs that are for the good of the student. However, the negatives far outweigh those positives because the school and all the individuals involved are liable for what could happen should the publisher find out. Additionally, Mrs. Brandon will be very uncomfortable, as she's already expressed, by the use of these materials and the violation of the copyright law. In the moderate option, the positives are that St. Regis as a whole school would be better prepared moving forward by implementing and creating a technology use policy. They can destroy all copies to hopefully receive no legal action if they just get rid of them and wipe all of them, but you would also have to know where all of them are, how many were made, did they get all of them back, things like that. And you'll have to find legal ways and work with the PTA more to find ways to get materials for students and teachers. The negative is you're not sending a bold message. you're fixing a problem, but you're not explaining necessarily what happened. You're swiping over it and trying to do better for next time. And the negative is you're likely still liable should the publishing company find out, especially if there's even one sample or copy left over, then they are definitely liable for even one copy. In the extreme option, you're sending a bold message to staff members about what you're willing to tolerate in your school, which is great, but Mr. Sample has already spent a lot of time building relationships with all these people, and he doesn't want to jeopardize that. Teachers and staff would be properly trained in technology use, and you're giving a heads up to the publishing company and offering to work with them, and hopefully they don't come for you harder if you don't tell them. But the negatives are that Mrs. Lynn would lose her job, and we don't know if she's been trained enough on this. We would assume she would be because she's a library media specialist, but if no technology use guideline has been set up, then she can't really be fired for something that hasn't been specified by the school. And then contacting a publishing company could actually result in deeper issues. The publishing company could decide not to work with you, and you could have a huge lawsuit on your hands. For those reasons, the best option is the moderate option. Because the case study does not share what the technology acceptable use policy is, we have to assume there isn't one, especially since they're a new school or a new to technology school. So creating one would be best, and finding a way to distribute it and regularly address it with staff and teachers and students is important. Providing this kind of training to the PTA is also helpful so that they know when they're looking for materials what's going to be most beneficial. Can they ask to wrap in the cost of software with extra copies? Can they buy extra copies off the top? It's going to be good for them to know how they can allocate their money that they're wanting to put towards the school. And that's going to build better relationships in the long run. So the action plan for this, I would require Miss Lynn to collect and destroy all the copies. Seeing as when we started this technology avenue, we worked together, I would like to work together with her on that and collecting them, logging them, and finding a way to properly destroy them. I would want to meet with the leadership team of the school and discuss and create a technology use policy, as well as a way to roll that out in conjunction with copyright laws to specifically address this issue that's taking place in our schools. And hopefully teachers, staff, and students and the PTA will be understanding of this. Because step 4 says to meet with the PTA and communicate what this policy is and how they can help us as teachers and as a school moving forward to ensure issues don't arise. All in all, working together in this kind of team format is going to create a more stable community and more specific guidelines and protect everybody involved, but specifically the students and the school as a whole. So there are 2 things that could go wrong. Number 1, I could see Mrs. Lynn refusing to collect and destroy the copies since she's so adamant about their value. And while they are important, it would be Principal Staples' priority to do this with her and ensure that all of these are done. If she still refuses to do it, she could potentially face a probationary period until the issue is handled, and may even potentially be fired depending on where she falls in regards to the copyright regulation and what she knows and doesn't know. The second thing that could go wrong is the PTA have no additional funds to purchase more software or copies of the legal copies of the software. While this is the highest likely chance of something that could go wrong, this just means that I would need to work with them to find ways to raise more money or find ways that next year we can allocate more money to technology than somewhere else. Technology is a huge thing, and especially when schools start to get it and they get different resources, everybody wants to use it. So it's also about finding the right way to spend their money. Overall, this module is really supportive in assessing how to handle a situation, not only one that seems so clearly right, but also one that many people may see as a gray area, because while, like Mrs. Lynn said, she's doing it for the good of the students, but you can't break a law when you do it. So let's find another way to make this work. And that's going to be a huge part of being an administrator in a school, is finding that middle ground of, I agree, I want to help the students, and I think what you're doing is the quick way to do it, but it's not necessarily the right way to do it. So there's my video, there's the case study, and thank you. Have a good night.